The topic is file permissions in Linux, importance of file permissions, and we will be doing some commands and file permissions to see how it works. So, what does file permission mean? We know that in Linux there are users and groups, and also there is a Linux server. In an organization, every user works on a Linux server, and not all users have the same permissions to the files or the folders. For example, admin, root user has all the permissions and it assigns the permissions to the other users. For example, developers or DevOps engineers. There are developers in one group and DevOps engineers in one group and network engineers in one group. All these groups will have different permissions. So why there is the need of having different permissions for different users or different groups? If suppose all users were having all the permissions like root, there would be a lot of chaos. If a user deletes the system binaries or important files, there would be system corruption. Giving access to all files or folders to all users increases the chance of its deletion, its corruption, and its manipulation. To avoid that confusion, only users that need the access of the files, for example, if developers need access to certain folders and certain permissions, they are granted that access. Whereas if DevOps engineer group doesn't need that access or doesn't require access of it, so they are denied it by in accordance to the roles and responsibilities of the users and what they perform, the permissions of the files or the folders are given to them. By default, Linux sets the basic file permissions or folder permissions. It is same for all the files that are created or all the folders that are created. However, we can modify that by using chmod or chown command. Let's first create users. I will create DevOps engineer user by add user command, also web developer user by using add user command. It's created. Let's switch the users su space hyphen DevOps engineer, and in other tab open su space hyphen web developer. Then let's do cd change directory in the web developer to the tmp folder. Then let's create the file kf.sh. Perform vim kf.sh. Let's do the simple command, that is echo Linux is easy. Escape :wq, enter. Now the shell script is visible. Now let's switch to DevOps and see that shell script. We can perform cat command, cat kf.sh. We can see that it shows Linux is easy. That means we have permissions to view, that is read. Let's try to see if we can modify the script. As you can see, it is not allowing me to modify the script as this DevOps user doesn't have the permissions to do so. So that was the default permissions that Linux provides. We can also modify the permissions as per our needs. Let's do chmod space o equals nothing space kf.sh in the web developer. Now as you can see in the DevOps user, cat cat that is read is also not working. That means the permissions of other user is denied. Even read is also denied. After we do ls ltr, we can see in the left hand side there are certain words that is like d, rwx or rw or r. These are the file permissions or directory permissions. If there is d in the start, that means that it is a directory, and if there is no d in the start, it means it's file. So r stands for read, w stands for write, and x is equals to execute. The rwx, 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 these are in three sections. The first section is for users, second is for groups, third is for other. User is the user that has created it. Groups is in the groups are many members, that means it is the group permission, and for others it is some user. Now by default, the web developer user that has created the kf.sh script doesn't have the permissions for execute. So when we do /kf.sh, it won't execute that script. To let it execute the script, let's switch to the root and perform chmod u equals rwx read write execute for the user space kf.sh. Now let's try it again. Now it's executable. Now let's change it again to rw, that is read write. Now you can see we can't perform. Another method for performing these permissions is by numbers. Performing chmod u equals rwx, comma g equals rwx, comma o equals rwx space file name or script. Sometimes it is tedious and tiring. So to avoid that, Linux also supports the number system, that is r equals 4, w equals 2, x equals 1. So if we want all the three permissions, that is rwx, it would be 7. 7 for the user, 7 for the group, 7 for the others. So 777 would be all the permissions given to the user, all the permissions given to the group, all the permissions given to the other user. So instead of writing chmod space u equals permissions comma g equals permissions comma o equals permission space the file or script, we can do it simply by chmod space 777 space kf.sh or the file name or script. And if we don't want all the permissions, we can simply do, if we want read write, we can do 666 666. So it would be r from 4 and w from 2. So it would be 6. To check this, let's switch to the root user and go to the home directory. Change folder permissions to chmod 777. No, that was about chmod. Now let's understand chown. Chown means change in ownership. It means to give entire ownership of the file or the folder to another user. Let's create a file in web developer user. In LSLTR, we can see its ownership is web developer. Now to change its ownership from web developer to DevOps, we must go to the root user and change its ownership to DevOps user. Let's perform chown space DevOps engineer or the user name colon DevOps engineer space the file or script name. Now you can see ownership has been changed. Now if a file has read write in the user and read write in the group and only read in the others permissions, and the folder has only read write in the user and only read in the group permissions, and if other users try to access that folder or the file, it wouldn't happen because the permissions of the folder doesn't allow other users. Even though the file allows the permissions for others, if the folder doesn't have the permissions to allow, it won't allow. So we can imagine that file is inside the folder. So if the user group or others has permissions to access the folder, then they can try to access the file if they have permission for it too. And if they have permissions for files and if they don't have permissions for folder, they can't enter the file as well as the folder. So in order to access the file, if they have permissions, they must also have the permissions for the folder. So in short, file permissions cannot override the folder permissions. Let's change the TMP folder permissions to 700. That means only the root user That means only the user has permissions for read, write, execute, and groups and others doesn't have that permissions. chmod space 700 space /tmp. Then if we change the file permissions inside the tmp to 777, that is read, write, execute for all users, groups, and others, even though that file has more permissions, we can't access that file as the folder doesn't allow that permissions to access. So the file cannot override the folder permissions. As you can see, you can't enter tmp by DevOps, let alone you entering the file inside it. So that is it for the video today. I hope I made the topic simple and insightful. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Thanks. Have a great day. Bye.